The boardroom was silent as Trent clicked through my slides, reading lines I had written at 2 in the morning, recommendations I had crafted over weeks, insights I had discovered through countless hours of analysis. His voice rang out confidently as he gestured at charts I had built from scratch. "I led the analytical development of this strategy," he announced, his tone smooth and practiced. Meanwhile, I sat exiled in a back corner chair with no nameplate in front of me, no acknowledgement of my existence. My stomach dropped as the reality hit me. Heat spread through my chest like wildfire. I gripped my notebook so hard the metal spiral dented my palm. This was really happening. He was stealing my work in real time, erasing me from my own presentation in front of 4 board members who would decide the entire future of our company. My throat tightened as I fought to keep my expression neutral. I thought to myself, he wouldn't actually do this. But he was doing it. He was doing it right now, and nobody was stopping him. My name is Lauren. I'm 32 years old, and 3 minutes ago, I watched the man who manages me completely erase me from my own work in front of the most important people in our company. I've been with Apex Analytics for 4 years now, working my way up from junior analyst to senior strategist. This presentation was supposed to be my breakthrough moment, the project that would finally get me recognized beyond my small team. Instead, I'm sitting in the back of this boardroom like furniture nobody bothered to move out of the way. My hands are shaking slightly, so I press them flat against my thighs under the table where nobody can see. The humiliation burns behind my eyes, but I refuse to let tears fall. Not here. Not now. Not in front of these people who already don't see me. Trent keeps talking, his voice filling the room with confidence I helped build. Every word he speaks feels like theft happening in slow motion, and I'm powerless to stop it without looking bitter or difficult. One of the board members, Mr. Holloway, flipped his pen between his fingers and leaned forward. His gray eyebrows pulled together as he studied the slide showing our quarterly volatility forecasts. "What statistical model did you use to forecast the third quarter volatility?" he asked, his tone sharp and probing. The question hung in the air like a challenge. I watched Trent's face carefully from my corner seat. For just a second, his confident smile flickered. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "We used a standard regression analysis," he finally said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. My heart started pounding because I knew immediately that his answer was wrong. Completely wrong. We hadn't used standard regression at all. Mr. Holloway's frown deepened. Another board member, Ms. Pierce, set down her tablet and looked up. Her eyes swept across the room and landed directly on me sitting in the back corner. "Perhaps we should ask her," she said quietly. The entire room pivoted to face me. I sat up straighter in my chair, feeling everyone's eyes on me suddenly. My voice came out calmer than I felt, steady and controlled despite the adrenaline rushing through my veins. "We used a hybrid model," I explained clearly. "The original regression analysis failed our stress testing phase, so I developed a combination approach that accounts for both seasonal patterns and unexpected market shocks." I spoke for maybe 9 seconds total, answering in the time it took Trent to fumble for 40 seconds. The information was precise, technical, and exactly what Mr. Holloway had asked for. A quiet ripple of understanding passed across the boardroom table. I saw Ms. Pierce nod slowly, making a note on her tablet. Mr. Holloway leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful now instead of skeptical. I glanced at Trent and watched his confident smile twitch at the corners, then die completely. His face had gone pale. He cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to recover his composure, but the damage was already done. The board had seen him stumble on a basic question about his own supposed work. 2 months earlier, I had been sitting in a strategy meeting when Trent interrupted me mid-sentence. I had been explaining my idea for restructuring our client reporting system when his voice cut across mine. "What Lauren is trying to say," he had announced to the room, "is that we need to restructure our client reporting system." He then repeated my exact idea word for word, just rephrased slightly to sound like it came from him. The room had turned to him with interest, nodding and asking follow-up questions. Nobody looked back at me. I remembered the sharp sting in my throat as I forced myself to smile and nod along like his interruption hadn't just erased me from my own contribution. That was the first real red flag, the first moment I should have recognized the pattern forming. But I had shoved the feeling down, telling myself I was being too sensitive, that this was just how workplace dynamics worked sometimes. I had convinced myself it would get better if I just kept my head down and worked harder. After that meeting, small things started changing. Trent stopped inviting me to the preparation sessions for bigger presentations, claiming he wanted to save me time since I was so busy with analysis. He would return my detailed reports with his name inserted above mine in the author field. When I asked if I could present my own findings to department heads, he waved me off with a practiced smile. "Don't worry about it," he would say dismissively. "I'll handle the presentation side of things. You just focus on what you're good at, the numbers and data." Each small dismissal felt minor on its own, but together they built up like pressure behind glass. My resentment grew quietly, hidden beneath professional smiles and polite thank yous. I started noticing how often my voice disappeared in meetings, how frequently my ideas emerged from Trent's mouth instead of mine. The pattern was unmistakable once I allowed myself to see it clearly. But by then, I felt trapped, unsure how to speak up without seeming difficult or ungrateful. When the board strategy project landed on our team, I volunteered immediately. This was the kind of high-visibility work that could change careers. I poured myself into it completely, working late nights at the office until the cleaning staff started recognizing me. I missed my best friend's birthday dinner and survived on microwave meals eaten at my desk. The work consumed me, but I didn't mind because it felt important. This was my chance to finally rise above the noise, to prove I could handle executive-level strategy work. I was genuinely proud of what I was building, the models I was developing, the insights I was uncovering. But Trent kept dropping casual comments that should have warned me about what was coming. "Just keep gathering the data," he would say when I tried to discuss bigger strategic questions. "Don't worry about the big picture stuff, Lauren. That's not really your strength anyway." Looking back now, I could see how he was positioning me as invisible labor, the person who did the work while he took the glory. 3 weeks before the board presentation, I finally went to human resources. I sat across from Amanda Klein, the HR representative assigned to our department, and tried to explain my concerns about Trent taking credit for my work. Amanda listened with a tight, professional smile that never reached her eyes. She nodded in all the right places and took notes on her tablet. "We'll definitely look into this," she assured me, her tone soothing but somehow empty. "These situations can be tricky, but we take all concerns seriously." I left her office feeling slightly better, hoping that bringing it to HR would create some protection or accountability. 2 days later, I discovered that Amanda had immediately emailed Trent about our conversation. He pulled me aside in the hallway with a wounded expression, asking why I felt the need to go behind his back instead of talking to him directly. That's when I realized the truth that crushed my remaining hope. HR didn't protect employees like me. HR protected managers like Trent. My trust in the system cracked completely that day. 1 week before the presentation, I was searching my email for an old data file when I accidentally discovered an email thread I hadn't been copied on. The subject line read Board Presentation Strategy. My cursor hovered over it for a moment before I clicked. My heart started racing as I read Trent's message to the department directors. "I'll be presenting my strategy to the board next Thursday," he had written. "I've been developing this approach for the past 2 months and I'm confident it will address their concerns about market positioning." There was no mention of me anywhere in the entire thread. No CC line with my name. No acknowledgement that anyone else had contributed. Just theft, documented in black and white, preserved in our company's email system. I stared at my computer screen for a long time, my pulse pounding in my ears. The fluorescent office lights suddenly felt too bright. My hands trembled slightly on my keyboard as the full scope of his plan became clear. He intended to present my work as entirely his own creation. I made a decision in that moment, sitting alone at my desk with that damning email still open on my screen. I decided not to confront Trent. Not yet. Confrontation would only alert him that I knew about his plans, and he would find ways to cover his tracks or exclude me even more thoroughly. Instead, I started documenting everything systematically. I created a private folder on my personal laptop at home and began transferring files every evening. I saved every version of every document with timestamps clearly visible. I took screenshots of email threads, including the metadata showing dates and times. I printed drafts with my handwritten notes in the margins. I documented every meeting, every contribution, every piece of analysis I had produced. This wasn't about revenge, though part of me certainly wanted that. This was about preparation, about protecting myself and the truth of what I had created. I worked methodically and carefully, building an undeniable record of my work. If Trent wanted to erase me, I would make sure the evidence remained. 4 days before the board meeting, Trent called me into one of the small conference rooms. He closed the door and sat down across from me with what he probably thought was a mentoring expression. I wanted to talk to you about the presentation next week, he began, folding his hands on the table between us.
I think it's best if I take the lead on this one.
You can support from the background, answer any detailed questions if they come up.
He paused, waiting for my response.
When I didn't immediately agree, he continued. It'll reflect well on both of us, trust me. The board responds better to a unified voice, and I have more experience presenting at this level. The translation was clear even though he didn't say it directly.
Stay small so I can look big. Stay quiet so I can be loud. Stay invisible so I can shine.
My smile felt forced, stretching across my face like a mask.
My jaw tightened so hard it ached.
Whatever you think is best, I heard myself say, hating how weak my voice sounded. But inside, I was counting down the days until the truth would come out.
The morning of the board meeting arrived cold and gray.
I dressed carefully in my best professional suit, a navy blue jacket and pencil skirt that made me feel slightly more confident. I arrived at the office early and went straight to the executive conference room to set up my laptop and notes. When Trent walked in 30 minutes later, he immediately started rearranging the room. He moved my chair from its position at the presentation table to the back corner near the windows. We don't want to overwhelm the board with too many voices at the table, he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. You'll still be here if we need you for detailed questions, but this way the focus stays clear. My cheeks burned hot with humiliation as I picked up my materials and moved to the corner seat he had indicated.
No nameplate would mark my presence there.
No acknowledgement that I belonged at that table. I sat down in exile and watched Trent position himself center stage, exactly where I should have been.
But I said nothing. I smiled politely and opened my notebook.
I was waiting. I was ready. The presentation began smoothly enough. The board members filed in, shook hands with Trent, and took their seats around the polished conference table. Nobody acknowledged me in my corner.
I might as well have been part of the furniture.
Trent launched into the presentation with practiced confidence, clicking through slides I had designed, speaking words I had written. Then Mr. Holloway asked his question about the statistical model, and I watched Trent's first stumble.
But there was more.
Ms. Pierce frowned at another slide, the one showing our revenue projections across different market scenarios. These numbers don't match what we saw in last quarter's report, she observed, her tone sharp with suspicion.
I leaned forward slightly because I could see the problem immediately. The chart was wrong.
Trent had altered my original numbers, probably to make the projections look more impressive. My actual analysis had been more conservative, more realistic. He fumbled again, trying to explain the discrepancy, but his words came out tangled and unconvincing. The board members exchanged looks. Their expressions shifted from interested to suspicious.
They were starting to sense something wasn't right.
Mr. Holloway set down his coffee cup with a decisive clink.
He gestured toward me with one hand. Why don't you come join us at the table, he said. It wasn't really a question.
I'd like to hear you walk us through your work.
My heart jumped into my throat. This was it.
This was the moment I had been simultaneously dreading and hoping for.
I stood up on shaking legs and moved toward the conference table. Trent's face had drained of all color.
He tried to interject quickly, his voice slightly too loud. Well, actually, I think I can clarify those points if you just give me a moment to. Mr. Holloway cut him off mid-sentence with a raised hand. Let her speak.
The command was quiet but absolute. The room fell silent.
Every board member turned to face me expectantly. I took a deep breath, placed my hands on the back of the chair Mr. Holloway had indicated, and began. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I had lived with this analysis for months. I knew every number, every assumption, every conclusion.
This was my work. It was time to reclaim it.
I walked the board through the entire methodology, starting from the initial data collection and moving systematically through each phase of analysis. I explained the decisions I had made about which models to use and why. I detailed the risks I had identified and the recommendations I had developed to address them. My voice stayed calm and professional, even as my hands trembled slightly against the chairback.
I didn't brag or editorialize.
I didn't throw Trent under the bus or make accusations. I simply told the truth, clearly and precisely, letting the facts speak for themselves. Ms. Pierce asked follow-up questions and I answered each one without hesitation. Mr. Holloway nodded slowly as I explained the hybrid model's stress testing results. Another board member, Mr. Kowalski, made notes on his tablet while I walked through the revenue scenarios. The room's energy had completely shifted. These weren't polite nods anymore. These were engaged, interested questions from people who recognized genuine expertise when they heard it. I could feel my confidence growing with each answer. This was what I had worked for. This was my moment. Trent must have realized he was losing control of the narrative because he suddenly jumped in, his voice desperate and slightly too loud. She handled the data collection and initial analysis, he interrupted, talking over the end of my sentence. But the overall strategy, the big picture thinking, that was my contribution. I directed her work and synthesized everything into a cohesive vision.
The room went very still. I watched the board members' faces shift almost in unison. Ms. Pierce's eyebrows rose skeptically. Mr. Holloway's expression hardened.
Mr. Kowalski stopped taking notes and looked up slowly, his gaze moving from Trent to me and back again.
The silence stretched uncomfortably long.
Finally, Ms. Pierce spoke, her voice cool and measured. If the strategy was your idea, she said to Trent, then why can she answer detailed questions about methodology and model selection that you couldn't? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Trent opened his mouth, then closed it again. No good answer existed. He had just proven my point more effectively than any accusation I could have made. I watched the board members start exchanging subtle glances, the kind of silent communication that happens between people who have worked together for years. They were looking at Trent differently now, with the sharp assessment people reserve for someone whose mask has slipped. Every confident claim he had made at the start of the meeting was being re-evaluated in light of his inability to answer basic questions about his supposed work. Mr. Holloway tapped his pen against his notepad in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Ms. Pierce's expression had gone from skeptical to coldly analytical. This was the unraveling happening in real time, and I had a front row seat to watch it unfold. I didn't smile because that would have seemed petty or vindictive. But I did let myself breathe properly for the first time since the meeting started. The truth was coming out, not because I had forced it, but because Trent's lies couldn't withstand even basic scrutiny. Sometimes justice doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it just requires letting someone dig their own hole while you stand back and watch. Mr. Kowalski flipped back several pages in the presentation deck, his frown deepening. There's a discrepancy in the budget allocation section, he said, pointing at the screen. These numbers show a significant investment in external consulting that I don't remember approving. I recognized the numbers immediately because they weren't from my original analysis. Trent had changed them, inflating certain budget lines to make his role appear more substantial. He had added consulting expenses that never existed to justify the scope of what he claimed to have managed. My stomach twisted as I realized this wasn't just stealing credit anymore. This was manipulation of financial data, falsifying numbers in a presentation to the board. That crossed a completely different line. Ms. Pierce's voice cut through the tension. I'd like to request an internal audit of this project's actual expenses and resource allocation, she said formally. The other board members nodded in agreement. Trent swallowed hard. I could see a bead of sweat forming at his temple. His career wasn't just in trouble anymore. He might be facing serious consequences. The audit took 3 days. I was called in to meet with the company's internal audit team and provided them with all my documentation, the timestamps on file versions, the email threads, the original budget figures I had submitted versus the altered ones Trent had presented. On the 3rd day, they found something I hadn't even known about. Buried in Trent's deleted emails, recovered from the server backup, was a message he had sent to 2 junior interns 6 weeks earlier. The email instructed them to bypass me entirely and send him raw data files directly. He told them to strip my name from any analysis summaries before forwarding materials to him. He had been systematically working to erase my contributions from the project record, not just taking credit but actively removing evidence that I had done the work. The email was damning proof of premeditation. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. This was deliberate, calculated theft. The audit team thanked me for my cooperation and told me they would be presenting their findings to senior leadership. I left that meeting feeling vindicated but also somehow hollow. The truth was out, but so much damage had already been done. Amanda from Human Resources called me 2 days after the audit concluded. Her voice on the phone sounded different than before, less smooth and professional, more uncomfortable and uncertain. "Lauren, we need to speak with you," she said. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" I walked into that meeting with my shoulders back and my head high. Amanda sat across from me with another HR director I didn't recognize. They both looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting papers around and not quite meeting my eyes. "We weren't aware of the extent of his actions," Amanda began carefully. The words sounded rehearsed. "The audit revealed serious misconduct that we should have caught earlier. We want you to know that we take these situations very seriously. I listened quietly, watching them try to backpedal from their earlier dismissal of my concerns. The translation was clear. We protected the wrong person, and now we're trying to avoid a lawsuit. Trent has been placed on administrative leave pending a final review, the other HR director added. We'll be conducting a full investigation.
I thanked them politely and left. Trent was gone. The truth had won.
But none of this would bring back the months of humiliation and stolen credit. Trent tried one last desperate move during his final interview with the board of directors. According to Ms. Pierce, who later told me what happened, he attempted to frame me as difficult to manage and resistant to collaboration. He claimed I had refused to work as part of a team and had tried to undermine his leadership. He painted himself as the victim of a vindictive employee who couldn't handle constructive feedback. But every single claim he made collapsed under the weight of evidence. When he said I refused to collaborate, they showed him email chains where I had repeatedly asked to be included in strategy meetings. When he claimed I was resistant to feedback, they presented my revised drafts incorporating every suggestion he had ever made. When he tried to suggest I was trying to take sole credit, they pointed out the timestamps proving I had created the work he presented. Every lie was contradicted by documentation. Every accusation was disproven by his own emails. I wasn't in that room to watch it happen, but Ms. Pierce described it as a complete self-destruction. He had constructed a narrative that couldn't survive contact with facts. 1 week after Trent's administrative leave began, I received an email from Mr. Holloway requesting a meeting. I arrived at the executive floor with my heart pounding, unsure what to expect. The board's executive committee was waiting. They thanked me first for my integrity and patience throughout the investigation. They apologized for not recognizing the situation sooner, for allowing the credit theft to continue as long as it did.
Their words were formal but seemed genuine.
Then Mr. Holloway leaned forward. "We'd like to offer you the position of strategy director," he said. "It's the role Trent held, with full authority over the department and direct reports to this committee."
My breath caught in my throat.
This was everything I had worked toward, the recognition and authority I had earned through countless late nights and stolen credit.
The salary would be substantial. The visibility would be career-changing.
I should have been thrilled. But as I sat in that executive conference room, something inside me shifted. I thought about how small this company had made me feel, how I had shrunk myself trying to fit into spaces that didn't want me. I asked for the evening to consider their offer. Mr. Holloway seemed surprised but agreed readily. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with a glass of wine, thinking about what I really wanted. I could step into Trent's old job, take over his office, inherit his direct reports. It would be a clear victory, visible proof that merit eventually wins. But something about that option felt hollow, like I would be stepping into his shadow rather than creating my own path. I remembered all the times I had been afraid to speak up in meetings. I remembered shrinking myself to avoid seeming difficult or demanding. I remembered accepting table scraps of recognition while others feasted on my work. This company had allowed that to happen for years before finally acting. Yes, they were offering me a promotion now, but only after I had proven myself beyond any possible doubt, only after a scandal forced their hand. Did I really want to build my career in a place that had required me to fight this hard just to be seen? My next chapter deserved more than inheriting someone else's discarded chair. The next morning, before I responded to Mr. Holloway, I checked my personal email. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a message from Hammond Strategic Group, one of Apex Analytics' main competitors. The subject line read Director Position Opportunity. I opened it with curiosity. The email was from their Chief Strategy Officer, someone who had apparently been at the board presentation, invited as an outside consultant. She had watched me answer questions that day. She had seen how I handled myself under pressure. Hammond Strategic was offering me a Director of Advanced Analytics position with full autonomy over my projects, complete authority over methodology and presentation, and a compensation package 20% higher than what Apex had just offered. But more than the money, the email emphasized culture. They wanted someone who would be valued from day one, not someone who would have to fight for recognition. They wanted innovation, not politics. I read the email 3 times, feeling something like hope blooming in my chest. This wasn't just a lateral move or a slightly better offer. This was a clean slate. This was a chance to start somewhere that saw my value before I had to prove it through suffering. I walked into the Apex Analytics building one last time 3 weeks later, after I had accepted Hammond's offer and worked my notice period. Trent's office stood empty now, his name already removed from the door plaque. The space felt hollow and impersonal without his presence filling it. I packed my few personal items into a small box, the coffee mug my friend had given me, the plant that had survived on my desk for 4 years, a photo of my family. I handed in my security badge at reception and signed the final exit paperwork. Then I walked out through those glass doors into bright afternoon sunshine. The air felt crisp and clean. I stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the sun warm my face, feeling the weight of the past months finally lifting from my shoulders. I felt no bitterness toward the people I was leaving behind. I felt no need for petty goodbyes or dramatic final statements. I just felt free. I felt like someone who had finally chosen herself and won. I had left a building that once made me feel small and invisible, and I was walking toward a future that finally fit the power I had always possessed. The story wasn't about revenge in the end. It was about recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept anything less. That victory felt bigger than any promotion could have given me.